Hello and welcome to Chapter 6 on binges and emotional eating. So let's just actually start this chapter by taking a few deep breaths and taking a moment to really disconnect from whatever you've been doing earlier today and take a mental break from whatever you're going to have to do after you listen to this class. So take in a deep breath and just let it out. Another deep breath and let it go. And a third deep breath and out. Just a quick reminder that our breath is a way to really give ourselves some of those momentary breaks that we often need throughout a day. And we're about to dive into a really big chapter, emotional eating and binge eating. So let's start by recognizing that the connection between food and love and our biology is really deeply wired. Most of the time it's thought of as the first lesson that we learn as babies is that food equals love equals security. And so that translates really early into us learning to use food as a way to care for ourselves. And we eat for so many different emotional reasons, positive ones and what we often call like negative ones. So we eat when we're stressed or bored. We eat when we're lonely. We eat in order to distract ourselves or to procrastinate. Food and the process of eating can be numbing and grounding. And then it can also be a reward or a treat. It can be exciting. There's just so many different reasons for emotional eating, including things related to like peer pressure, meaning like everybody else is eating. And although peer pressure is, I would also say family pressure. It's, for example, if your grandmother's really feeling like her feelings are hurt that you haven't finished your plate, and we eat out of guilt. And we also eat due to the fuck it's, meaning like maybe you've been on a diet or you've been restricting certain food groups, and at a certain point you just get done with your willpower and you say, fuck it, I'm going to eat. So that's even an emotional reason. I really like this quote by Deepak Chopra. Subconsciously, we recognize the relationship between food and spirit because language uses taste metaphors to denote emotions. We are familiar with expressions such as sweet love, sour grapes, salt of the earth, pungent remarks, bitter resentment, or astringent humor. So it's just a quick summary of all these references we have that link us to emotions and food and taste, and the way we move through the world. Here's another quick graphic that just is another way of demonstrating this spectrum that we go through with emotional eating. And you might take a moment to look at this and really see where you often land. And it might be more than one place, but anywhere from like sensory gratification, meaning that you just love the experience of eating. Maybe you love the taste, or some people even just love that hand to mouth motion. Comfort. The middle kind of represents distraction. I would also include in that middle zone things like numbing or grounding, how food can be really grounding. That's when we start to move into sedation, numbing. And then all the way, food can be used as punishment, not just to somebody else, but to ourselves. So the main point here is that food compulsion is about unprocessed feelings. There's some things we're going to talk about in the chapter on nourishment and nutrition about what we often maybe call food addiction, for example, like sugar addiction. A lot of people feel like the food that itself compels them to eat. And there's some truth to that, but I would say 80% of food compulsion is really about unprocessed feelings. Either we're feeling too much and we want to stamp it down, or we're not feeling enough, and so we want to like focus on food as a way to like enjoy ourselves or switch mood shift from feeling maybe, let's say, resentful and tired to feeling like, oh, I have a reward, I have something to look forward to. And a different thing here that's a little bit different than food compulsion is about food cravings. And I'm talking here about the really intense ones, the ones that feel similar to like an emotional temper tantrum. Just kind of scream, I will not be ignored. And this happens a lot in binge eating. This could be an example where, let's say you have a craving for something sweet and you get frozen yogurt. And as soon as the frozen yogurt's done, you want more. Maybe you want something else. It could be something different, like something crunchy, salty, chips, or it could be another sweet thing. And so then you decide to go to the grocery store and buy more. And it's just kind of that incessant thing of I want, and it can feel really hard to learn how to redirect that and quiet it down. Within this whole category of emotional eating and binge eating, I want to address non-hunger eating because it also can be a confusing aspect when we're learning how to rebalance how we eat. Non-hunger eating has to do with feeling like I need to eat according to the clock. Meaning it's noon, this is the time to eat, so I should be eating. Or if you're following some kind of old dieting rule where like you're not supposed to eat after sunset or after 7 p.m., you feel like you have to eat now, even if you're not hungry, because you're not going to be allowed to eat later. Non-hunger eating can also be eating just because everybody else is. Or it could be that you're looking at your schedule and your schedule's so busy, you think you won't get a break when you're hungry, so you have to eat now. And none of these things are inherently wrong or problematic on their own. They're all things that we have to do and manage. But you could see how it's just one more way that we're not listening to our body's actual clues and cues on if you're getting the green light that your body's ready for food and ready to digest. So one of the most helpful ways to think about cravings and binges is to not make it about the food. So if there's something that you are craving or wanting, what you tell yourself is, yes, I can eat this, but the guideline here is I'm going to wait until I'm hungry. So if you just finished a meal and now you have a craving for something and you know you're not hungry, you can make note of that craving and make a promise to yourself. This is what I'm going to have the next time I get hungry. And honestly, in this part of the process, even if what you're craving is cookies, you're allowed to say, well, for the next meal, maybe I won't have a typical dinner. Maybe I'm just going to have like dessert for dinner. I'm going to have this cookies. I'm going to satisfy my craving. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but it really helps kind of restore this process of you're allowed to eat what you want. And it helps undo some of the diet damage that comes with like food scarcity and deprivation. And another tactic, different one, is this idea of a binge timer. And binge timers is legit like taking your phone and you set a timer. So if you're really craving to eat and you know you're feeling out of control or out of balance, that it's feeling like a binge is coming on, you don't have to tell yourself that you're not going to eat. But what you do is you set a timer for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15 at max. And you tell yourself, once the timer goes off, I'm going to eat. But between now and then, I'm going to either sit with my feelings, I'm going to do a healthy distraction, I might journal, you could go for a walk. You don't have to actually do anything. You could stare out the window. But the point is, you're starting to interrupt that impulsiveness of the thought of, I want to eat, and in the action of eating. So you're starting to introduce this pause. That is a time for reflection. But again, you're not judged on whether or not you binge at the end of that. The goal here is just to create a pause. And while we're in this line of thinking about creating pauses and interruptions, you are also encouraged or allowed to interrupt the binge at any point. And what that means is often a binge, you don't even realize that you're in it until maybe you're at the end of it or the middle point. There's all different ways that like our consciousness starts to become aware of what's really happening within us. So you are allowed to interrupt the binge at any point. And it sounds strange, but that often looks like your hand is going in towards the box of crackers and part of your brain says, oh, I could stop now. I could walk away now. And it's almost like you're pulling your hand out like mid-action and letting go of the food. And to be honest, that is a really, really powerful breaking point. So often when we're thinking about wanting to change our behaviors, we're imagining how it's going to be in the future, how we're going to do something different next time or tomorrow. And it essentially, like, there is no tomorrow in this idea of when it really comes to living in the present moment and the power of being in the present moment to interrupt a binge. When you interrupt a behavior mid-stride or mid-flow, that is one of the things that's going to create so much change along the way. So it's a lot more powerful to interrupt an action while you're in action rather than it just being a thought experiment of tomorrow I won't binge. So even if you've had, let's say, 5 handfuls of crackers and you literally have your 6th handful of crackers in your hand and you pull away from that, that does so much to start to teach your brain new pathways. So here are just some more things that you can do related to when you're in that energy of feeling really strong cravings, binges, and emotional eating. What you want to do, once again, is you're not making rules about whether or not you're allowed to eat or what you're going to eat. Where the guidelines come in is how you're eating. And what that means is that you tell yourself, well, at least I'm going to sit down to eat. So if you're in the kitchen, window shopping through your pantry or your fridge, or you grab something, a bite, you're standing at the fridge eating or you're standing at your pantry eating, take your food, put it on a plate. I'll just use crackers again as an example. Even if it's crackers, put the crackers on a plate and go sit down to eat. That right there starts to really help us reprocess and change our relationship to food and what eating can look like. The leaving one bite is, again, a reference to that most of the time the way that we know we're done eating is through visual cues. And what I mean by that is when the food is gone, we think we're done. And that is an external cue that is not related to our hunger and fullness cues within our body, an internal cue. And so one of the ways of breaking the clean plate club is to leave one bite of food. And that is just, it's a disruptor. It's a disruptor in our habits and patterns. And honestly, it's kind of fascinating to see what an emotional struggle it is to leave one bite of food on a plate. On one hand, it takes a couple tries of trying to remember to do it as far as like an exercise. But then even once you remember to do it, it shows you start to see like how that rational part of your brain, the non-hunger part, starts to think, well, I don't want to throw this bite away, or I don't want to wrap it up. This doesn't make any sense. I should just finish it. It makes sense to finish it. And again, that's the rational part of us that is accustomed and habituated to what eating's supposed to look like. So leaving one bite of food on your plate will start to disrupt the patterns. Here's a great another thing to try to do is that within this context of all foods fit and we're not making rules that you're not allowed to buy things, let's say ice cream or a cookie. If you know there's a certain food that is bingey for you, meaning that if you bring it home, that it is just going to call your name and tempt you until it's gone. So with those foods, my personal recommendation is to still buy it, but buy it in the single serve sizes. I know that there are some people in the eating disorder community that suggest that we should be able to get to a point where you can buy all these foods and you should be able to have them in your home without binging on them. But I feel like honestly that that's setting us up, it's why make things harder on ourselves? Willpower whittles away, and that can just cost so much time and energy of saying no to food, no to food, no to food all day long. So what I really do believe works better is just to buy things in single serve sizes. And within that is to find your favorite thing. So if your favorite treat is a cookie, figure out which bakery or coffee shop or like grocery store bakery even has the kind of cookie you really like and go and buy that cookie versus buying like a package of cookies where you know there's just going to be too many left with you. Another option sometimes is in the grocery stores that have like bulk food items for even treats or snacks. That way you can buy it in a small portion, or single serve size bags of chips. These kinds of things Another example for bingy food, you can actually buy peanut butter in little packets that cost like $1.50. Now, granted, that's more money than it would be if you bought the peanut butter in a jar. But in this case, when it's gone, it's gone. And it will make your life emotionally easier. Peanut butter comes in single serve packets. Another bingy thing is pizza. But pizza by the slice is pretty easy to find. So if you're really wanting pizza, allow yourself, plan to have pizza, but go somewhere where you can buy just a slice instead of like the whole pizza pie. And then within this, also begin to learn the power of giving yourself permission to throw food away. Now, nobody wants to waste their money. Nobody likes to throw food away. But in this process of restoring balance to your body and to your relationship with food, I do believe that we have to pick our battles. And there are certain times where food sitting around the house is just going to be calling your name and kind of driving you insane. And your ability to just throw it away or get rid of it is actually going to create a lot more ease in your environment. And so much of what we also want to do is set our environments up for success. So permission to throw food away, that might be related to like takeout food if you go to a restaurant and not to bring it home. Or let's say you've had guests come over and they bring, it's a potluck and they leave food with you. If it's bingy food for you, either send that with them so that it's not left in your home or throw it away. And by throw it away, I mean throw it all the way away. There's plenty of people, no shame here, that even if food is in the trash cans, honestly, if it's sitting in the trash and it's not gotten, it's still in its package, it's pretty easy to pull food out of the trash can. So when it's time to throw a bingy food away, either take it all the way out to the dumpster or put it in the trash can covered with coffee grounds, something that is going to really make it inaccessible. And here we're starting to get to what it really means to start to check in with how you feel. And these questions are questions that you can use before you eat, while you're eating, or even after you're eating. So if you don't remember to check in beforehand and you're actually on your last couple bites of a meal and you realize, oh, I didn't do my check-in, just do it then. Anytime you pause and ask yourself some of these questions, you are starting to rewire your brain to connect to all of you. So we recognize there's a part of us that is either in a craving or having strong emotions, and yet there's a part that also wants to learn to have a new relationship with food. Now that part is often in the minority. In fact, when a binge is really strong, those other parts feel dormant. They're completely radio silent. At least it feels that way because the desire to binge or the emotional situations are so loud. It's almost like those are the parts that get the microphone. So what we want to start to create this practice of doing from a holistic view is to create pauses, to slow down, to check in, and to imagine or create space to hear these other parts of self. And here's what the questions might look like is, how will I feel physically? How will I feel energetically? How will I feel emotionally if I eat this food? After I eat it, how will I feel 2 hours? And how will I feel tomorrow after I've eaten this meal? And there is actually so much within our intuition and our sensitivity that will help you start to make some real distinctions about what to eat, when to eat, how to eat it. It's just we're often not in the habit of listening to our whole self when it comes to food. And here's part of the reason, just a quick graphic that explains why it's so important not to make rules around food. So if you're depriving yourself and the deprivation is high, you're probably getting by without much guilt. But then as soon as you cave and give in and have that food, the guilt skyrockets. And then once we're guilty and feeling uncomfortable, the emotional need for self-soothing increases. And then we're back in that dynamic again of needing to emotional eat. And so what we want to do is to balance this out. to create a space where it's not about deprivation. You truly can have what you want. It's a matter of finding the right place where it fits. And, I'm talking about foods for cravings, but if we're also thinking about the diet mentality, you might also think that if you're calorie deficient, how much that's going to kind of increase that need to I need to eat, or that even how when you skip meals, how much it just works up an appetite. So there's all these pushes and pulls that we're working to just balance out and moderate. So some of the things that you want to experiment with and what I'm really saying here is to give yourself permission to eat forbidden foods. So in my experience, personally and professionally, forbidden foods often look like crackers, cereal, peanut butter, pizza, ice cream, sweets, chips. Those are just some of the few obvious ones, but there's certainly more. And you want to think for yourself, actually maybe take a few moments right now and take a quick note. What are the foods that you have forbidden yourself? Honestly, if this was the 1990s, probably forbidden foods would be things like butter, eggs, whole fat yogurt. But since it's the 2000s now, so many people, even though this fad is going away, have been anti-carb for the last 10 years. So you want to think about what your forbidden foods are, what part of you considers these are bad foods or foods that you don't trust yourself around. And to slowly, very slowly, start to give yourself permission to eat forbidden foods. And what that might mean is that once or twice a month, you seek out a forbidden food and find it in a single serve size. I'm not suggesting that every single day you need to go and get the forbidden foods, but if you were to go 6 months kind of following this eating program, this intuitive eating program, all the while just staying too safe and only eating foods that aren't triggering to you, then you're going to have a false sense of security. So it's actually vitally important that at some point along the way, you start to lean in to the edges of foods that are scary or where you don't trust yourself around, and actually start to experiment what it's like to return those foods to your what's available to you. And again, you can set your environment up for success. Dr. Janine Roth, she's an author that writes a lot about emotional eating. She gives an example of carrying around a pillowcase full of M&Ms. Personally, I think that's a little extreme. I think that honestly, in my work, what I've seen with people works a lot better is that you give yourself small permissions, but a pillowcase of M&Ms, I don't know if you need to go that far. So a quote that's often used out there is that what we want to learn to do is practice self-love for ourselves and saying yes to ourselves. And we want to make a distinction that saying yes to yourself doesn't mean every single time and never saying no, because there's no love in obsession. So self-love is an act of knowing when to say yes and also when to say no. And that's true internally and with our relationships with other people. So if you're in the process of learning to either create a pause before you binge or to actually create some healthy distractions instead of binging, we've already talked about that idea about just postponing the binge with a timer. But here are some other ideas. Brushing your teeth can actually be an oddly surprising way to slow down that desire. Taking a bath, because that's really full of sensation and it takes a lot of time. Simply walking away, leaving the kitchen, leaving the house. A small thing like just walking around the block, depending on where you live, that might take 5 or 7 minutes, but that is a great disruptor, as well as calling a friend. Playing a game on your phone. Now that one can be really useful for people who are dealing with, who feel like they have a bit addicted to games or to their phone. If you feel like you'll play a game and then you're going to be lost for 2 or 3 hours, maybe that suggestion's not great for you. But for somebody else, a quick game of solitaire or something like that might be just what you need to just give yourself a mental break and not think for a little while. Journaling is always useful well, it's not always useful, actually. If journaling is useful to you, then this is a great time to bring out your pen and paper and do some reflection. And now also painting your nails, because once your nails are wet, you kind of can't do anything for a little while. And I would encourage you to think of what are some healthy distractions that you would add to this list that you know work for you, because certainly not all of these things are going to apply to everybody. So let's talk about what happens after a binge. Typically what happens after a binge is there is some momentary relief from food is actually fleeting. So that's starting to go away, and oftentimes guilt, discomfort, regret is starting to come into focus. And it can feel hopeless. It can feel pretty dark after a binge. And typically what happens is we don't realize it, but we do a thought experiment. We say, I'm never going to do this again. Tomorrow will be better. And we take ourselves out of the moment of discomfort, and we go in our mind and kind of time travel and suggest that everything's going to be better tomorrow. And that thought process does give us some momentary comfort, which has some use, you could say, but the truth is that never actually breaks the habit. So the better thing to do is to learn how, after a binge, to actually be with your feelings, to actually take some time to reflect, to notice if there's any discomfort in your body, where your emotions are taking you, where you're feeling your emotions. Is it your heart, your chest, your throat? Take a moment to kind of let that experience take up its, fully recognize it, and then let it go. So the difference between saying, tomorrow I'll do better, what you want to do is move on, because where we actually have power is in what we do next. And so instead of saying tomorrow I'll do better, or tomorrow I won't binge, or tomorrow I'll diet, what you want to do is say, I'm just going to wait until I'm hungry. You're going to wait until your body gives you that green light again, that it's ready for food. And it sounds simple, but that really is the best way to refocus, because it's not about diet mentality or deprivation. It's not going to allow you to rest or sit in the difficult emotions for too long. You just return to this idea of, I eat when I'm hungry. And you'll notice that I eat when I'm hungry is the mantra we use throughout this whole process. Chewing your food and eat when you're hungry. It's really simple, but we need it to be simple, because the intensity of the emotions related to binge eating and the mental constructs of the compulsion are so intense and complex that we need to simplify it and distill it way down. Chew your food and eat when you're hungry. And I wanted to include this quick note about social eating and holidays, because that's another time where it's really hard for us to connect and tune into what's right for our bodies. So these are just some quick tips. If there's a table full of food that's kind of spread out where it's self-serve, what you want to do first is walk up and down that table and just survey what's provided. That way you can highlight and choose your favorites. So if you start at one end and you didn't realize your favorite thing's at the other end, then your plate might be too full. So go through, look at what's provided, identify what your favorites are, and then make one plate that when you tune in and you look at this plate visually, you sense that it is the right amount of food for you based on how hungry you are. And then you can take that plate, and that's the plate that you want to snack from or eat from, rather than going back and forth to the whole holiday table. And the idea really is that if you don't love it, leave it. Even if it's a traditional dish like grandma's green beans at Thanksgiving, if you don't like it, it's okay to leave it, especially on an occasion like a holiday or something like that. This is a time to go ahead and choose your favorites. And if you're getting pressure from somebody, you can say thank you for offering. That does look delicious, but I'd prefer not to have any. Or even a simple no thank you. In our heads or in our hearts, we get so concerned about other people's emotions that we often lose our own boundaries. And even when it comes to food. So remember that it's okay to say, no thanks. That is a great way to you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to say, oh, I'm trying to heal my relationship with food, or I'm on a diet, or any of those things. You don't have to explain yourself, but you can say, no, thank you. Or if it's my preference not to. It's my preference is a great way to establish boundaries, whether or not we're talking about food or anything else. So let's summarize this chapter with some experiments that I'd like you to try to start to really embody this. Because again, this can't be just an intellectual pursuit. You actually need to figure out what's going to work for you. So a fun thing you can do is to make a distraction box. A distraction box is like a shoebox full of little things that are something that you can grab when you're feeling bingy or emotional. And it could be like a fidget spinner, it could be nail polish, it could be bubbles, it could be crossword puzzles or like knitting needles, things like that. It even in there could be a list of maybe some of your favorite movies so that you don't have to think about what to look for on Netflix or comedians, things like that. So distraction box is just a fun thing because when we're emotionally overwrought, it's actually really hard to think about like what to do that self-soothes us besides food. Because again, food's been that major placeholder for a long time. And when we are full of emotion or in that really compulsive place, it's just truly actually hard to think about these other kind of creative things. And again, these kinds of distractions, I'm not suggesting that they're going to do as good of a job as food, because right now, you're likely pretty programmed that food is really just like the perfect thing to make you feel better. So these things they're going to be kind of like B-list stuff. But again, they're important things to have so that you can start to break the addiction to food. Other things to do around the home to keep your place set up for success is to keep your kitchen table clear and to have your eating space, even if it's like wherever you normally eat, to have it set up in a way that's appealing to you so that when it's time to eat, you don't have to first clean up. And also remove the groceries from the house that are especially bingy. Single serve sizes of things are always fine. But again, you want to have your home be a bit of a sanctuary. And now let's look at some reflections that you can use for this chapter. These are some things so that at some point between now and when you take the next class to either reflect on internally or ideally write it down in a journal. How was I surprised, challenged, inspired? Where was I deepened, opened, strengthened, softened? Where do I take on responsibility that is not mine? Where am I triggered to step out of integrity? And where am I unshakable in my integrity? Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of chapter 6 on emotional eating and binge eating. Thank you.